welcome back to the channel. Welcome to another video. Now that the dust has settled on yet another chapter in the history of the Premier League, with the 2021-22 season being over, this video is going to be all about reviewing the season that has been, in which, of course, Manchester City were crowned Premier League champions, Liverpool runners-up, Chelsea and Tottenham both making it into the top four and will be playing Champions League football for next season, whilst Burnley, Watford and Norwich all got relegated. That is just the Premier League in pretty much a nutshell. But what we're going to do in this video is going to go through each and every team in ascending order from the bottom to the top, and just briefly talk about the season that has been for each and every single one of the 20 teams in the Premier League. But before we go any further in doing all of that, I would like to remind you to please like the video and also subscribe if you're new. Both things are always absolutely greatly appreciated. But for now, let's get into the video, and we're kicking things off with Norwich City, of course. Yeah, so we're kicking things off with rock bottom Norwich City. What can I say about this that I haven't already said? If you want more of a detailed, or a bit more of a detailed view on Norwich City, go back to the video I did several weeks ago when it was confirmed that Norwich would be relegated down to the Championship. I did a video solely focusing on Norwich's season. But to briefly sum it up, it's been a long and horrible season for Norwich. Couldn't really score many goals, conceded a lot, had a terrible defensive record, lost 26 of the 38 games this season. They were absolutely dreadful. To be fair, they were one of the favourites to obviously go down at the beginning of the season, as many people predicted. This classic yo-yo club dropping to the Championship and then being promoted again to the Premier League over the past few years has seen them yo-yo several times. It wouldn't surprise me if next season they get promoted again to the Premier League, only to go down the season after. It just seems to be the history of Norwich City. But yeah, a long and very dreadful season as far as what Norwich are concerned, in all honesty. 19th, we saw Watford. Again, I won't go into too much detail because I did a video on them when they got confirmed as being relegated. To be fair, you could have predicted what Watford's season would have been like. A change of manager pretty much every few months. They had about 3 different managers, I think, across this season, including, of course, Claudio Ranieri, and ending with Roy Hodgson. Again, another long season. Not enough goals. Terribly defensively, similar to Norwich. And again, one of the Premier League new boys of this season got relegated. And again, you could argue that they may be one of the favourites to come straight back up next season along with Norwich, but only time will tell on that score. In 18th, Burnley finally got relegated after dancing with the devil for a number of seasons of relegation, considering the resources that they have at their disposal and obviously their shoestring type budget in comparison to most of the teams in the Premier League. Burnley eventually got relegated. Again, a couple of days ago, I did a video on Burnley being relegated, so go check that out if you haven't already. But yes, Burnley finally got relegated on the final day of the season in what was obviously a bit of a shootout between themselves and Leeds in terms of who would win and who would go on to remain in the Premier League. Long old season of Burnley, just not scoring enough goals. Like, the defensive record was pretty solid, just not scoring enough goals meant that they couldn't turn some of the draws they received into wins, and that ultimately cost them in the end. Not enough wins under their belt across the season ultimately punished them. They may be one of the favourites again to come back up there next season, but only time will tell. 17th, Leeds United. Again, they stayed up by the skin of their teeth, more or less. It was a long and difficult season for Leeds. They had to navigate through some pretty tough problems. It was a season that began with Marcelo Bielsa and ended with Jesse Marsch. You could argue that it was a long time coming for Bielsa across this season, because even though he had obviously had a lot to deal with in terms of injuries and COVID cases across key parts of the season, he was seemingly too stubborn to change his approach and to change his tactics at all across the campaign. And ultimately, Leeds were getting absolutely battered by certain teams, including a 7-0 loss to Man City, a 6-0 defeat to Liverpool, and even a 4-0 defeat to Tottenham. Jesse Marsch came in, picked up a couple of good results here and there, and it proved to be enough for Leeds United to remain in the Premier League. In 16th, Everton. Who would have thought that Everton Football Club would have been in a relegation battle? Probably only Everton fans, really, when they heard the news that Rafa Benitez was taken over at the beginning of the season. Liverpool fans were calling for Agent Rafa to relegate Everton, and it almost proved to be. It was only until the saviour of Frank Lampard came in towards the end of the season that things started to pick up a little bit for the Toffees. He came up with a couple of good performances and results here and there, and it proved to be enough. But for an Everton side that has spent big in the past few years, a relegation battle seemed a bit embarrassing, and even more embarrassing was the incredible pitch invasion that followed after a 3-2 victory over Crystal Palace that secured their Premier League status. Slightly embarrassing from a Liverpool fan's point of view, but hey, at least Liverpool are guaranteed 6 points next season, am I right? In 15th, Southampton. Now I have to admit, at the beginning of the season, when I made my predictions over how this league was going to go this year, I personally had Southampton to go down because I couldn't work out where their goals were coming from. As it turns out, there was actually 3 worse teams, or in this case 5 worse teams than Southampton this season, and Southampton did go on to actually pull off a few very good results here and there. They were difficult to beat at times, pulled off some good results, and ultimately had a pretty sound and secure season, albeit rather going under the radar at times. Southampton were pretty solid for the most part, just nothing really to shout about, to be honest. Just kind of went a little bit under the radar for Ralph Hasenhutl's side, but another solid season in the Premier League nonetheless. In 14th, Aston Villa, slightly underwhelming considering the transfer window in the summer that obviously Aston Villa conducted, bringing in some fresh faces and some exciting ones at that. Dean Smith's Aston Villa at that time were looking to really challenge for European football, but after the first few months of the season, didn't really pan out that way, or it wasn't at least looking to pan out that way. Fast forward to obviously the present day, and Dean Smith was obviously sacked, and he was replaced by the former Rangers manager and Liverpool legend and icon, Steven Gerrard. And whilst things began well for Gerrard, things sort of fell apart a little bit over the course of the winter going into the spring months, and it was kind of mediocre from there. But there was enough to suggest that maybe there is something to build upon for Gerrard. Once obviously he gets rid of some of the players that many would consider to be dead wood, and once he brings in some of his own players, maybe he can really start to mould this team in his image. There's a decent platform for Gerrard to build off, albeit not exactly there right now, and obviously there's a lot of work to do. But maybe, just maybe, there is something for Gerrard to really work with for especially next season. In 13th, Brentford. Now, many people predicted, including myself, that Brentford would be one of the more likely teams to survive out of the obviously 3 new teams that were being promoted from the Championship, and so it has proven to be. I said that Brentford would pull off a few shocks this season, and to be fair, they have done it. It's not just because of the way that they conduct their business off the pitch in their very unique style and unique way. It's not just because of the fact that Thomas Frank is a pretty decent manager in my opinion, and with the way that he plays football is actually pretty decent. And it's also about the way that they had a couple of players to watch out for in the Premier League, with the likes of Ivan Toney in particular. Brentford definitely played very well this season and have conducted a safe and sound 13th place finish. It was a season that began well. It trailed off a little bit in the middle as teams started to work out how to play against this Burnley side. But then at the back end of this season, they really turned it on again and really showed that they were a proper team to be reckoned with. I think the signing of Christian Eriksen in January, whilst being a pretty big gamble, paid off and was a very big and inspired signing. He had a creativity to their midfield that was lacking over that middle period of the season where they just couldn't find enough goals. I think it's been a very good season for Brentford. The only concern is that I hope, and they will obviously hope, that they don't suffer with second season syndrome going into next campaign. In 12th, Crystal Palace. Again, another safe and secure season for Palace in the Premier League, but this time under different circumstances, of course, because they have had a new manager in the dugout for them this season in the form of Arsenal legend Patrick Vieira. Tipped by many at the beginning of the season to be the first manager to be sacked and for Palace to be one of the favourites to go down this season because he's unproven in the Premier League, Vieira started turning some heads after he really took to Palace very quickly and started to change the club from within and change the style and change everything. After years of being under Roy Hodgson, a very different manager to Vieira, of course, it was going to seemingly take a while for Vieira to start changing the club and changing how he wanted the team and the squad to play. But to be fair, he took to it like a duck to water and did very well, in all honesty. I think he's done very well this season. I think there is definitely something to build up, but it will be interesting next season if he continues to perform in the way that he has been, especially when you consider that the likes of Conor Gallagher may not be there for next season, who was probably one of the loan signings of the summer, one of the transfers of the season, in my opinion. I think he's done very well, but it will be interesting to see where Patrick Vieira does go from here and how he builds on this 12th place finish. In 11th, we have Newcastle. At the beginning of the season, things were looking doom and gloom and bleak for Newcastle. It's incredible what a multi-billion or whatever it is takeover can do for a club, isn't it? Because fast forward past the Mike Ashley era, they managed to get rid of Mike Ashley. They got rid of Steve Bruce not long afterwards, and fast forward to now where they're under mad money owners, tycoons, whatever you want to call it, and have got Eddie Howe as their manager. And after a transfer window that saw the likes of Kieran Trippier and one of the signings of the season, in my opinion, in Bruno Guimaraes, walk through the door at St James's Park, things are now, for the first time in a very long time for Newcastle United, starting to look up. They're starting to look promising. They're starting to look positive. There was a light at the end of that tunnel. That tunnel obviously produced a lot of money at their disposal. It's going to be interesting to see how they continue to build from here with the owners that are said to be not only looking at making Newcastle a real force in Europe within years to come, but also one of the top dogs in the Premier League. It's going to be very interesting to see how Eddie Howe and how these new owners conduct their business going forward and how they build upon this 11th place finish. Moving into the top half of the table now, 10th place, we've got Wolves. Very solid season for the most part for Wolves. They actually, they were a difficult side to break down and beat. Bruno Lage, and again, another new manager to the Premier League, a bit of an unknown entity as a manager in the Premier League, really took to it for the first half of the season. He made Wolves a difficult side to break down. He made them strong, resolute. The problem with them is that they just couldn't find enough goals to really challenge. European places were talked about for Wolves for a very long time, but towards the second half of the season, as it got further and further into it, the goals kind of dried up and their defence was starting to creak a little bit. Maybe that's a sign of things to come for next season. I don't truly know. But for the most part, like I say, it was a solid season. Jose Sarr in goal for Wolves was seen as a very good signing to begin with. But things, like I say, just started to kind of fall apart a little bit under Bruno Lage towards the second part of the season. Solid season though, a 10th place finish, an improvement from obviously the last campaign. It'll be interesting to see where Wolves do go from here though, whether this is actually the start of a trending pattern going into next season, their deterioration, or whether they just need a few more players to bolster up their squad, particularly in the attacking third, to get the goals that they need to challenge properly for those European places. In 9th place, we have Brighton. A very good season for Brighton, a solid season for Brighton in which they broken a few records and got to a very high place in the Premier League table. Graham Potter's side have played some great football this season, but again, the one criticism you could have of Brighton for the most part is, again, not a consistent enough goal scorer. Goals were difficult to come by for the most part of this season, and it ultimately cost them a little bit. They were one of the draw specialists of the Premier League this season, and again, you just figure that if they could find a consistent and prolific enough goal scorer, maybe some of those draws could have actually turned into wins. But nonetheless, a very good season. European football was again talked about for the most part, but they did suffer a little bit of a dip in mid-season, only to actually pick things up again and to resurrect themselves towards the end of the campaign, in which they actually started to score plenty of goals. surprisingly. And actually, you put in some good performances and got some good wins out of it. The 4-0 at Manchester United instantly sticks out in my mind as to a very good Brighton performance. But yeah, a lot to be positive about for Brighton this season, a lot to work with, but again, they need to find a consistent enough goal scorer if they are to challenge for European football for next season. In 8th place, Leicester. Leicester had a pretty underwhelming season for the most part. I know that injuries and COVID cases and suspensions and that kind of played their part, and I think European football also played its part a little bit as well. But for the most part, it's pretty underwhelming from Brendan Rodgers' side. It started good, a Community Shield victory against Manchester City, but it wasn't quite the same level of what we've known from Leicester for the past few seasons, and it kind of fell apart a little bit. They were floundering a bit in mid-table for the most part of this season. They kind of picked it up a little bit towards the end to really resurrect their form and to actually finish in 8th place. I actually didn't think they were that high in the table until I actually was preparing to do this video, because they've kind of, whilst being under the radar, whilst being underperforming, they've actually gone a little bit under the radar in my opinion this season. So it was actually quite surprising to see that they were in 8th, but again, it will be interesting to see where Leicester and Brendan Rodgers go from here and how they go about trying to challenge for the Europa League / Champions League places for next season. In 7th place, we see West Ham. Now, in my opinion, I genuinely believe that if West Ham hadn't had the amount of injuries that they've had this season and didn't also have European football to contend with in the form of Europa League, given how the top 4 race has gone this season, I reckon West Ham would have had a very good chance of achieving top 4 had they not had those things to consider and to contend with. I think with the way that obviously Man United have failed this season, I think with the way that Arsenal missed out on a couple of opportunities to really take top 4 by the scruff of the neck, and with the way that Tottenham obviously were floundering at the beginning part of the season, I think top 4 was there for the taking, but West Ham unfortunately just didn't have the squad depth to really kind of make it their own and to really contest that position. Nevertheless, a 7th place finish is still pretty solid for David Moyes. It's only 1 place lower than what they finished last campaign, which is pretty solid considering that they had a transfer window in which they only required really 1 player of note, and that player was Kurt Zouma, whose moment of the season was for all the wrong reasons, and I'm sure his cat won't thank me for reminding him of what that moment was, so I'm just going to leave it there. And of course, to have European football as well on top of that, so the extra games to consider as well. It's all been a very solid season for West Ham, and of course, the highlights of their season being Mikel Antonio, but in particular Jarrod Bowen. It's going to be a long summer, I think, for both Declan Rice and Jarrod Bowen in terms of transfer speculation. It's going to be a long season for West Ham to see if they can actually keep hold of those 2 star players in particular, because they have properly made a name for themselves, particularly this season. So it's going to be a very interesting summer ahead for West Ham and for David Moyes. In 6th, Manchester United. What an absolute train wreck and car crash of a season it's been for Manchester United. It's actually a miracle that they've actually finished in 6th, to be honest with you. A season that had a lot of hope and a lot of promise going into it. 2nd place finish last season was seen as being big for them. It was seen as them going in the right direction. They then acquired Jadon Sancho, Rafael Varane, and of course the return of the king, Cristiano Ronaldo, all going to Old Trafford this season. It was going to be a season in which they were going to contest the league and contest trophies again. And it failed. It failed. It was an utter failure right from the get-go. It was terrible for them. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was sacked within the first few months of the season after some pretty poor performances, including, of course, losing 4-1 to Watford and losing 5-0 to Liverpool at home. They lost 5-0 to Liverpool at home. And then, of course, Ralph Rangnick comes in. Things don't really pick up. Many people were not expecting things to really pick up. Many people were expecting this club to continue to fail because of how toxic it is right now at this club. And it was made even worse by some poor performances. Losing 3-1 to Arsenal and losing 4-0 again to Liverpool was obviously the main highlights of that in particular. Nothing really good comes out of this season unless you obviously count the fact that it was confirmed towards the end of the campaign that next season former Ajax manager Erik ten Hag is taking over at Old Trafford for the next campaign. A manager that a lot of clubs were looking at and wanting. It is Manchester United who have got him. Ralf Rangnick moves on to his director's position behind the scenes at United. So maybe some form of club resurrection is in the process for United. But obviously only time will tell on that. And whether or not Ten Hag will prove to be a success or not remains to be seen. But yes, the only good thing about this is that the season is over for Manchester United, and now they can begin preparations for the next campaign. In 5th place, we have Arsenal. Now, at the beginning of the season, when I made my pre-season predictions, I said that Arsenal would finish 6th. So I guess in this aspect, they have overachieved, in my opinion, by 1 place. However, as the season went on, obviously expectations changed, and Arsenal was seen as big contenders for the top 4. With Man United failing, Arsenal were looking to take advantage, and for the most part had top 4 right there in the palm of their hand. They had it for the taking, but in the big moments, they just missed out on the opportunity to really grasp it by the scruff of the neck. It was there, it had massive opportunity, but Arsenal failed to take it. And ultimately, that comes down to, I believe, squad depth and a lack of a prolific goal scorer up front. If you'd have asked an Arsenal fan after the first 3 games of the season where they would finish, the top 5 would have been a very big shout because of how they started the season. But they had their moments, they went on their runs here and there, and there were some big moments for Arsenal. They performed better when the pressure was off them, and when the pressure was on them, that's when they started to crumble a little bit, and that's obviously the story of their season and why they missed out on the big opportunity of missing out on top 4. The summer's going to be really big for Mikel Arteta and for Arsenal. They really need to add to their squad, obviously, in key areas, particularly in the attacking sense and depth in midfield, in my opinion. And next season is going to be massive for them. They missed out on the opportunity this season for top 4, especially when you consider that they had no European football to contend with either. So next season is going to be massive. They really need to get back into the top 4 next campaign. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with this club. But hey, at least we've got an Amazon documentary for Arsenal to look forward to, right? That's going to be very interesting as well. So a lot to look forward to for neutrals and rivals looking at Arsenal for the summer, and then obviously to see how they do next campaign. In 4th place and playing Champions League football for next season, we see Tottenham Hotspur, the saviour of Tottenham's season, Antonio Conte. Without him, Spurs would not be in the top 4. They would not be in the Champions League. And he is ultimately their hero, their saviour at the end of this season. Because let's be honest, it was a season that began with Nuno Espirito Santo. It was already chaos before that because he wasn't exactly their first choice manager to take over, was he? Nope, he was like their 13th, 14th, 15th or whatever it was choice. And although it began really well for Nuno with a victory over Manchester City on the opening day, things took a bit of a nosedive from there. And by November, he was given the sack and replaced by Conte, which did raise some eyebrows when it was announced. But after a few hiccups here and there and a few bizarre moments and some mad outbursts, it really did all come together in the end. They were the ones to keep their nerve when it mattered most. They were the ones to take advantage of Manchester United failing and Arsenal missing out on some big opportunities to take top 4. And in the end, they're the ones that kept their nerve. They're the ones that managed to get into the top 4 position for the Champions League for next season and really make it their own. It's going to be an interesting summer, no doubt about it. They need to improve on their squad. They need to obviously build on this from here on out. It's going to be interesting to see the relationship continue between Conte, Daniel Levy and Fabio Paratici, the Spurs chairman and sporting director, obviously. That's going to be an interesting relationship to watch over the summer in terms of how Tottenham conduct their transfer business and, of course, how they build upon this for next season. But for now, Spurs are in the Champions League for the next campaign. Fair play to them. 3rd place, taking the bronze medal, Chelsea, in what was an incredible and very strange season, of course, for Chelsea. It promised so much going into it, especially when you consider that many people were saying that last season Chelsea lacked a clinical goal scorer, and then they managed to bring back Romelu Lukaku to Stamford Bridge for over 100 million. And many people are like, yes, this is the guy. When you put him with Chelsea's attacking, creative, flair players that they have around him, he is going to bag plenty of goals and probably be one of the top goal scorers this season. It didn't pan out that way, did it? Lukaku didn't he hit the ground running a little bit, and then obviously COVID and injuries happened. Then a bizarre interview came out in which he basically said he wanted to be back at Inter. He didn't really want to leave. He loves Inter and all that stuff that happened. And then it all sort of fell apart from there, really. Chelsea couldn't really score many goals. They were strong and disciplined and solid defensively, but they were ultimately quite boring to watch and didn't really score that many goals. And that's why they kept on drawing games and losing a few here and there. And that is ultimately why they fell apart and fell away from the title race. They did make it to 2 domestic cup finals. They came runners-up in both of them to Liverpool on penalties, so they were close but no cigar on that score. And they failed to successfully defend their Champions League title by being knocked out by Real Madrid in the quarterfinals, despite a very brave and very spirited second leg against the Spanish Giants. But ultimately, it was stuff off the pitch that really took the headlines for Chelsea. I think Thomas Tuchel deserves an immense amount of credit for keeping a clear and cool head during these sort of unsafe and unknown times at Chelsea. He was the one constant, consistent figure to really front the whole Chelsea Roman Abramovich sanctions and everything that was going on with the Chelsea ownership and stuff. I think he deserves immense amount of praise and for fronting it out. Maybe he was a bit too open and honest at times, but really when he was probably given no direction and nothing really to go on in terms of what to say, I think that he conducted himself really, really well on that score. It's going to be a very interesting summer for Chelsea in terms of where they go from here. Of course, the ownership is still a little bit up in the air as to how they're going to conduct their business. It's going to be interesting to see how they do, because there's so much up in the air at Chelsea in terms of contracts, in terms of players leaving, maybe players coming in as well, things like that, in terms of players' contracts and everything like that is still very much up in the air at Chelsea. So it's going to be a very interesting summer to watch over at Stamford Bridge during the next couple of months or so. In second, taking the silver medal and missing out on the Premier League title by a single point is, of course, Liverpool. And I'm not going to say this because I'm a Liverpool fan. I'm going to say this because it's true. It's been an absolute phenomenal season for Liverpool, hasn't it? At the beginning of the season, no one tipped them to win the Premier League. No one tipped them to be challenging on multiple fronts across the season. Nobody really expected Liverpool to be doing much because the transfer windows basically said they weren't going to do it. They didn't really sign anyone. They only made one acquisition in that summer, and that was the form of Ibrahima Konate. Many people were expecting their squad depth not to be good enough, but yet here we are at the end of the season, knowing that Liverpool have secured the Carabao Cup, they secured the FA Cup, they've got a Champions League title to go and win on Saturday, and they took the Premier League to the final day. They were 14 points off it at one point, and yet they managed to close that gap and make the title race interesting to the final day of the season, where they took it to the final day. And maybe had Villa kept their nerve a little bit, maybe, just maybe, Liverpool could have won the Premier League title. But as it is, it was Manchester City that went on to win it. Liverpool come runners up. It's been an incredible season for Liverpool. They say that football is a squad game. It couldn't be more truthful than watching this Liverpool team. Each and every member of that squad, from the starting 11 to the subs, to the reserves, to the squad rotation, to everybody that played this season, each and every single one of them players played their part and had a strong mentality from it. Whether it was the players that weren't used very often to come in for a game or two and put in a real good display or score a really important goal or whatever it may be, each and every single one of that team played their part to pretty much perfection. It was just that, obviously, across a 38-game season, Manchester City were just that little bit better than them. And that's obviously going to sting. It's obviously going to sting for the most part. But, of course, they can redeem themselves somewhat by winning the Champions League and going for the Cup treble this season. It's been an utterly fantastic season. It's been an incredible ride. It's been an incredible journey for Liverpool fans to be a part of. And obviously, I should know, I've been a part of it. It's been absolutely incredible to watch from start to finish. And maybe just maybe next season, maybe they can go that one step further. But for right now, enjoy the cup success and obviously look forward to the Champions League final, Reds fans, because it's going to be another intense and insane game against Real Madrid on Saturday. And finally, of course, I've already mentioned it, top of the table, top of the league, Kings of England, Champions of England, whatever you want to call it, Manchester City. Again, another solid season for Pep Guardiola's side. Another good season, and obviously which they win the Premier League. You'd have to argue that maybe slightly underwhelming considering that they lost everything else. You know, even they lost the Community Shield. They lost in the Carabao Cup in one of the early stages of that competition. They lost in the semi-final of the FA Cup to Liverpool, coincidentally. And, of course, they got knocked out in the Champions League semi-final to Real Madrid. And that's the one that's going to sting the most. The Champions League one is obviously going to sting the most because that's the one they won. But to win the Premier League was a bit of a saving grace for them. It could have been worse, obviously, because for the most part of that final game of the season, Liverpool could have actually gone on to be the Premier League champions. But they managed to turn it around against Aston Villa very late on to obviously claim that Premier League title, to save their grace and to add another trophy to Pep Guardiola's collection. Another incredible season, and next season is already looking very bright indeed, because whilst obviously many people are now looking ahead to next season and beginning preparations for next season in terms of transfer business and things like that, City have already made a massive wave in this transfer window by acquiring the services of one Erling Haaland. Now, of course, Haaland is one of the hottest properties in football right now. He is a striker. He is a prolific and consistent one at that. So City have only bolstered their squad and their attacking options and obviously their goal-scoring threat for next season. A team and a squad that has together scored 99 goals this season. The top goal scorers in the Premier League have just acquired one of the most dangerous strikers in world football, which obviously is a frightening prospect and of course reinforces their chances of not only Premier League success next season but success across many fronts as well, including of course the one that they want the most, the Champions League. Like I say, been a very good season for City in terms of their Premier League success. They will look back on the cup competitions and the Champions League in particular and look at missed opportunities there and maybe even a bottle job in the semi-final of the Champions League against Real Madrid. But like I say, they've already made plans for next season. Erling Haaland is going to be at the Etihad for next season in the Premier League, and that is a frightening prospect for the majority of defences right the way through that Premier League and of course across Europe. So congratulations to Manchester City, Premier League champions. I did talk about this more in a video that I did when City won the Premier League title on Sunday, so go back and check that out if you haven't already. But yes, City are Premier League champions, having retained their Premier League crown. But of course, as I always say, these are just the thoughts, comments, opinions, and obviously the feelings and reviews and whatever you also want to call it of this guy. I want to know what you guys think. What do you make of the Premier League season that has just been and gone, the 2021-22 season? What did you make of certain teams? Who were you following? Who were you supporting? What do you make of other teams? And what are your own thoughts and comments for the future? What are your own opinions for the future? What do you see happening in the summer? Do you see anybody making some big waves in the transfer window? And what are your early predictions for next season? I'd love to know anything and everything that you have to offer down below in the comment sections. I'm sure it'll make for interesting reading. Otherwise, hit that like button on the way up. Enjoy the video, subscribe if you're new or want to see more content like this. Both things will always and forever be greatly appreciated. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening. I've been Fletch. This has been another Fletch Talks video. And I will see you all again soon in another video.